Closer look and spotlight. And we'd like to welcome Ziv Cohen, clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at Cornell College. Dr. Cohen, thanks as always for joining us. Based on what's publicly known about this particular 17-year-old who went on this killing spree, what jumps out at you?
Well, I don't think we have enough information, and I can't diagnose him specifically without examining him, but I think certainly it does make you think about the suggestibility of youth, the fact that we're having a rash of these kinds of attacks, and the more they occur, the more they become, in a sense, a model for disaffected youth about how to express, their disaffection. Then that creates a real problem, because you have people who may not have a history of mental illness and may not have warning signs, and yet they're thinking and fantasizing about these actions.
And the fantasy, does that include, look, it's crazy that somebody would take lives to begin with, but the idea that you're then tying it into pop culture songs or things that you might have associated with something else, what does that say?
Sure. I think, that word fantasy is a good word. Clearly, there's some inner world that this guy is inhabiting that seems very bizarre to the rest of us. And that can include elements of pop culture, elements of celebrity, of grandiosity. And so there's some altered way of dealing with reality here, dealing with a sense of alienation, lack of connection to others. And, again, I think that as long as the attacks are happening, it creates a pattern that other people can emulate.
And it seems like in this particular case, he was at least emulating the tactics of previous school shootings. Have we gotten to the point now where I suppose, kids who are depressed, who want to somehow get even with their classmates, they know that if they have a very high body count, they can somehow become well-known or achieve some sort of level of fame that maybe they thought somehow in their sick mind is worth it?
Sure. So again, with like a lot of these attacks, and again, we need more information in this case, but one certainly thinks about depression, and there's one symptom of depression can be a kind of nihilism, which is feeling that nothing has meaning and it's okay to take other lives and it's okay to take your own life. There are reports that in his journal there were suicidal statements, and that he actually made a statement to authorities that he had wanted to kill himself but lacked the courage. So, unfortunately, depression is a very common condition, and it's just not possible to detect every single person who may be having these fantasies. And so this is creating a real problem for law enforcement, and I think we should all be very worried tonight at this kind of attack with a young person where there really, as far as we know, were no warning signs.
And we hear that from a number of people who have been through attacks, whether it's Florida or whether it's even going back to what happened in Colorado some 15 years ago, that for everybody who's been through this, every time they hear of a new shooting, it essentially causes them to sort of relive what they went through.
I think that's true. Certainly people who have experienced trauma or have PTSD, their symptoms can be reactivated by similar events. And I also think there's an element of secondary trauma. Watching media reports is not typically what we consider something that would cause full-blown PTSD. But I think for all of us, when we see these attacks continue to occur, there is a kind of numbing quality to it, and an almost unreality to it for all of us. And I think it certainly has an impact on people all across the country.
Is there a danger in our society that there's a certain sort of fatalistic approach that may be seeping into the minds of so many young people? And I say that because we've heard from so many high school students who said, well, I never thought it would happen to my school, but then I guess I sort of did because it's happening to so many schools, that it's almost as if kids now just sort of expect that this kind of thing's going to happen.
Absolutely. I think kids, and I think parents as well. And so we're in a uncharted territory here where the unthinkable has become routine. And I think, again, that poses tremendous challenge for school authorities, for law enforcement, for the mental health profession, about how to deal with this world this new world that we're in, where these attacks are very possible and they're relatively common.
Ziv, if there's a young person out there who's thinking about something like this, what would you say to him or her?
I think that there are stages to developing a mindset like this, and it depends at what stage they're in. If they're just having fantasies and they're far from action, then I think intensive treatment is the answer. However, if they've begun to take concrete steps towards fulfilling this fantasy in reality, then I think we're really talking about some kind of custodial care, at least in the short term, and that would be hospitalization or law enforcement intervention, because a person can go very, very quickly from initial concrete steps to actually carrying out their fantasy.
Ziv Cohen, clinical assistant, professor of psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. And Dr. Cohen, thanks as always. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up.